The chamber went silent the moment I raised my hand. Every eye in that vast circular hall turned toward me, and none of them were kind. I was Daniel Hart, junior liaison for the human delegation, and I had just asked the Galactic Council to save a colony full of my own people. "The request is denied," said the presiding officer, a tall being with silver skin and eyes like polished stone. His name was Vurilik, and he said the words the way someone might swat away an insect. "Human colony Meridian 9 does not meet the threshold for council intervention. The matter is closed." I stood there with my mouth dry. Behind me, Laura Bennett, our senior ambassador, placed a hand on my shoulder, but I could feel her own hand shaking. 300,000 people lived on Meridian 9. Farmers, teachers, children who had never seen a battle in their lives. And somewhere out past the edge of council space, a fleet belonging to an empire called the Krivtal was massing at their border, waiting for permission from nobody to do whatever they wanted. "You don't understand," I said, and I heard my own voice crack. "These are civilians. They have no defense fleet. If the Krivtal move on them, there will be nothing left." Vurilik did not even look at me. He was already reviewing the next item on the docket, a trade dispute between two species I had never heard of. "Species with insufficient technological standing," he said, almost bored, "cannot expect council resources to be spent on their behalf. Perhaps if humanity had joined the council a century earlier, instead of squabbling among yourselves on your own world, this would not be a problem." Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber. Not loud, not obvious, but I heard it. A soft chuckle from the Threxian delegation. A low hum of amusement from the insectoid cluster near the back. They were laughing at us. At people who might die in a matter of days. I looked at Laura. Her face had gone still, the kind of stillness that I would later learn to recognize as dangerous. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply nodded once, gathered her tablet and said, "Understood. The council's position is noted." That was it. No protest. No demand for a revote. I wanted to shout, to remind them that we had watched their own war fleets bicker over territory 100 times worse than anything happening on Meridian 9, but Laura's grip on my arm told me to stay quiet. We walked out of that chamber together, past rows of alien dignitaries who barely glanced at us, and I felt something twist in my chest. Shame, yes, but underneath it, something colder, something that felt almost like relief, though I could not explain why at the time. Outside, the corridors of the council station stretched in every direction, lit by soft blue light that always made everything feel clean and distant, like nothing bad could ever happen here. I caught up to Laura near the transport bay. "They just left them to die," I said. 300,000 people, and they didn't even discuss it for 5 minutes. "I know," Laura said. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Aren't you angry?" She stopped walking and turned to face me. For a moment, I thought I saw something behind her eyes, something she was holding back with great effort. Then it was gone, replaced by the practiced calm of a diplomat. "Being angry in that room accomplishes nothing, Daniel," she said. "They expect us to shout. They expect us to beg. They have seen 100 young species come through those doors and throw tantrums when they don't get their way, and it changes nothing, so we don't give them that show. Then what do we give them?" She almost smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Time," she said. "We give them time to see what happens next." I did not understand what she meant. Not then. I assumed she meant we would appeal through some other channel, file a formal complaint, try to build alliances with other species for the next vote. That was how diplomacy worked, or so I believed. We took the long route back to the human embassy section of the station, passing through the observation deck that looked out over a slow, silent field of stars. I remember stopping there, staring out at that endless dark, thinking about the people on Meridian 9 who did not know yet that the galaxy's governing body had decided they were not worth saving. "You should message your family," Laura said quietly, standing beside me. "Tonight, just to talk, not about any of this." "Why?" She did not answer right away. She just kept looking out at the stars, her reflection faint in the reinforced glass. "Because things are going to feel different soon," she finally said. "I want you to remember what normal felt like." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You're being dramatic." "Maybe," she said, but she did not laugh with me. Later that night, alone in my quarters, I did message my parents back on Earth. My mother answered from the kitchen, flour on her hands from baking bread, and she asked how the council meeting went. I almost told her everything. I almost let it all spill out, the anger, the humiliation, the fear for the people on Meridian 9. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of Laura's calm, unreadable face. Maybe it was some instinct I did not yet have words for. "It was fine," I told her instead. "Same as always." She smiled and told me to eat something other than ration packs, and we talked about nothing important for 20 minutes. And it was, in its own strange way, one of the last truly ordinary conversations I would have for a very long time. I did not sleep well that night. I kept thinking about Meridian 9, about families who had no idea their fate had just been decided by beings who considered them beneath serious conversation. I thought about the laughter in that chamber. I thought about how easily they had dismissed us, how certain they seemed that humanity was simply another young, struggling species that would beg for scraps of protection and accept whatever crumbs the council offered. What none of them understood, what I myself did not yet understand, was that humanity had spent its entire history learning a very particular lesson. We had learned it through fire and hardship on our own world, long before we ever reached the stars. We had learned that when the people meant to protect you fail to act, you do not simply accept your fate. You prepare, quietly, patiently, without asking permission from anyone. The next morning, I noticed the first small sign that something had changed, though I did not recognize it for what it was. Ethan Cole, one of the military attachés assigned to our delegation, was not at the morning briefing. When I asked about him, another officer simply said he had been recalled to Earth for routine reassignment. It seemed unremarkable at the time. Officers got reassigned constantly. I did not think much of it. I had my own work to focus on, appeals to draft, meetings to attend, a slow and frustrating effort to convince other delegations to support a resolution that would never come to a vote in time to matter. I spent that day and the next several days buried in that work, believing, foolishly, that words and patience might still save Meridian 9. It was only much later, once I understood everything that followed, that I looked back on that moment in the council chamber and realized something important. Laura had not been defeated when she walked out of that room. She had not been broken by their laughter or their dismissal. She had simply understood, in a way I did not yet grasp, that humanity did not need the council's permission to answer for what had been done. The stars outside that observation deck looked peaceful that night, quiet, unchanging. I had no idea that within weeks, some of those same stars would bear witness to something the galaxy had never seen before. Something born not from cruelty, but from a species finally deciding it would no longer wait to be taken seriously. I did not know it yet, but the silence that followed our defeat in that chamber was not surrender. It was the sound of humanity beginning to prepare. The quiet lasted 3 weeks, and in that time, the galaxy made a mistake it would never fully recover from. It mistook our silence for weakness. I had been reassigned back to Earth during that period, ostensibly to help prepare documentation for a trade summit that would never actually happen. Laura stayed behind at the council station, continuing to smile politely in meetings while giving nothing away. I did not understand the purpose of my reassignment at first. It felt like busy work, the kind of task given to someone whose superiors wanted him out of the way. It was only after I arrived home that I began to understand. Earth looked the same from orbit as it always had, blue and green and impossibly beautiful against the black. But something about the planet felt different the moment I stepped off the transport at the coastal spaceport near my hometown. There were fewer commercial ships in the docking queues than usual, fewer tourists wandering the terminal shops, and far too many military transports parked in restricted sections that had been empty the last time I visited. My cousin Grace Miller picked me up from the terminal. She worked in materials engineering at one of the northern research campuses, and she had always been talkative, the kind of person who filled silences without thinking twice about it. That day, she was quiet during most of the drive. "You've gone strange on me," I said, trying to sound light. "What happened to the woman who used to talk my ear off about carbon lattice structures?" Grace glanced at me, then back at the road. "I can't really talk about work right now, Daniel. Since when do you have secrets from me?" "Since about a month ago," she said. "Half my department got moved to a new facility. Nobody tells us anything except what we need to know for our own piece of it." I laughed it off at the time, assuming it was some new corporate policy, some overcautious project manager tightening the reins on information. It did not occur to me that this pattern was repeating itself across the entire planet, in laboratories and shipyards and research stations from the equator to the poles. Over the following days, I started noticing more. My uncle, a mid-level administrator at a shipping company, mentioned in passing that several of his best pilots had been quietly pulled for what he called special training, with no explanation given and no timeline for their return. A childhood friend who worked in software development told me her company had lost half its senior engineers to unnamed government contracts. Everywhere I went, I heard the same story in different forms. Skilled people vanishing into projects nobody could describe. At first, I told myself it was simply how large bureaucracies worked. Earth's government had always been a patchwork of departments and agencies, slow and inefficient in some ways, remarkably capable in others. It made a strange kind of sense that mobilization on this scale, whatever it was, would look chaotic and secretive from the outside. But I was a diplomat. I had spent months learning to read patterns in behavior, watching for the small signs that told you more than any formal statement ever could. And the pattern I was seeing now was not chaos. It was coordination, careful, deliberate, and hidden in plain sight. I tried calling Laura twice that first week, but both times I was told she was unavailable, tied up in meetings that ran longer than expected. On the third attempt, she finally answered, her face tired but composed on the small screen of my communicator. "How is the trade summit preparation going?" she asked, and there was something almost amused in her tone, as if she knew exactly how absurd that question sounded to both of us. "There is no trade summit happening, is there?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Not anytime soon, no." "Laura, what is happening back home? People are being pulled off their jobs. Facilities are closing to outside access. My cousin can't even tell me what she's working on anymore." She glanced away from the camera, as if checking to see if anyone else was near her. "I can't discuss specifics over this channel," she said, "but I will tell you this much. What you are seeing is not chaos, Daniel. It is preparation." "Preparation for what?" "For the moment, the Council finally understands what it created when it turned its back on Meridian 9, she said. "Be patient a little longer. And Daniel, when the questions start coming from other delegations, and they will come, you say nothing, not because you are hiding something shameful, but because it is not yet the time to explain." I wanted to press her further, but the connection ended before I could ask anything else, and I was left staring at a blank screen, my mind spinning with half-formed theories. Word came 2 days later that Meridian 9 had fallen under attack. It was not a surprise, not really. We had known it was coming since that day in the council chamber. But knowing something is coming and living through the reality of it are very different experiences. The reports were limited and fragmented at first, filtered through official channels that gave us only the barest outline. Krivtal warships had entered the system. The small planetary defense network, cobbled together from outdated equipment the colony could barely afford, had been overwhelmed within hours. Evacuation orders went out to the colonists, though there were nowhere near enough transport ships to move 300,000 people in time. I remember sitting in my apartment that night, watching the news coverage from an independent journalist embedded near the colony, her voice trembling as she described families crowding into shuttle bays, elderly residents being carried onto overloaded transports, children crying as their parents tried to explain why they had to leave everything behind. The footage cut in and out, the connection failing as Krivtal ships jammed communications across the system. I thought about the council chamber. I thought about Vurilek's bored expression as he dismissed our request for help. I thought about the laughter that had rippled through that room, soft and cruel, at the idea that these lives mattered enough to warrant a serious conversation. And for the first time since that day, I understood exactly why Laura had told me to save my anger. Because somewhere, hidden from public view, in shipyards and laboratories and testing facilities scattered across Earth and its closest colonies, that anger had already been transformed into something else entirely, something with purpose, something with direction. I did not sleep that night. I sat by my window and watched the stars, wondering how many of my own people were awake in that same darkness, working through the night to finish whatever it was they had been building in secret for the past several weeks. 2 days after the fall of Meridian 9, I received an unexpected message summoning me to a briefing at a secure government facility outside the capital. I assumed it was related to my diplomatic role, perhaps some update I needed to carry back to the council station. I did not expect to find Ethan Cole waiting for me at the entrance, dressed in a uniform I did not recognize, his expression harder and more focused than I remembered from our time together on the council station. "Daniel," he said, extending a hand, "it's been a while." "You disappeared without a word," I said, shaking his hand. "Routine reassignment," they told me. A faint, tired smile crossed his face. Something like that. He led me through a series of checkpoints, each one more heavily guarded than the last, until we reached a lower level of the facility that felt more like a bunker than an office building. The air smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil. Somewhere beneath us, I could feel a low vibration through the floor, the kind that comes from heavy equipment running deep underground. "I can't tell you everything," Ethan said as we walked. "Not yet, but I can tell you this much. What happened at Meridian 9 was not something we could have stopped in time, no matter what we had ready. The Council's delay cost us that colony, and there was no version of events where we could reach them fast enough to make a difference. Then why does it feel like something is about to happen?" He stopped walking and turned to face me, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen in him before. Not anger exactly, something colder and more controlled. "Because something is about to happen," he said. "Meridian 9 was allowed to fall because the Council decided our people were not worth the effort of protecting. They made that choice freely, in front of witnesses, without pressure, without excuse. They own that choice completely. And now? Now the Krivtal believe they got away with something," he said. "They believe humanity is exactly what the Council always assumed we were. Weak, unprepared, easy to push around because no one else will stand up for us." He started walking again, and I followed, my heart beating faster with every step. "They are about to learn how wrong that assumption is," he said quietly, "and so is the Council." I did not fully understand the scale of what was coming, not that day, not even after Ethan showed me glimpses of research data he was not technically authorized to share, projects with names that meant nothing to me at the time. But I understood enough to know that the silence I had witnessed over the past 3 weeks had never been submission. It had been the sound of a species finishing its preparations. And somewhere out among the stars, in the ruins of a colony that should have been protected, the countdown to a reckoning none of us could yet fully imagine had already begun. I was standing on the observation deck of a research vessel called the Aurelia Bright, 3 jumps away from what remained of Meridian 9, when the Krivtal fleet arrived at their next target. I had been sent along as an observer, a diplomatic witness whose presence was meant to satisfy Council protocols about civilian oversight of military operations. I did not yet know that what I was about to witness would end any illusions the galaxy still held about humanity's place among the stars. Commander Oliver Bates ran the operation from the bridge above me, and I could hear his voice through the deck speakers, calm and measured, giving orders that sounded almost casual despite the weight behind them. The target this time was Haldren's Reach, a border world with a population half the size of Meridian 9's, but with something Meridian 9 never had. It had us. Enemy fleet entering the outer system, a tactical officer reported. Formation matches their previous engagement. They believe this will be the same. Let them believe that a little longer, Bates said. I gripped the railing in front of the observation window, watching as sensor displays projected onto the glass showed dozens of Krivtal warships surging toward the planet below, their formation confident, almost lazy, the posture of a predator that had never once been made to feel like prey. What the Krivtal did not know, what nobody outside a small circle of human engineers and officers had known until this moment, was that Haldren's Reach was not merely defended, it was bait. The weapons systems that activated in the following minutes had no official names yet, not the kind that would appear in any council registry. The engineers who built them, working in secret across dozens of facilities on Earth and its colonies, had simply called them by their function: disruption arrays, gravity lattice projectors, systems built not from technology the council had approved or even inspected, but from decades of humanity's own independent research, developed quietly, patiently, without asking permission from anyone. The first sign of what was coming was subtle. A shimmer in space, barely visible even on the enhanced displays, as hidden platforms around Haldren's Reach powered up systems that had been sitting dormant, disguised as harmless satellites and communication relays for weeks. Then the Krivtal fleet began to fall out of formation. It happened slowly at first, ships drifting from their assigned positions as their navigation systems failed to make sense of readings that should not have been possible. Then it happened all at once, engines flickering, shields collapsing, entire vessels losing power as the gravity lattice around them twisted space in ways their instruments were never designed to comprehend. "They're disoriented," the tactical officer reported, disbelief evident in his voice even through the speakers. Weapons systems failing across the entire formation. They don't understand what's happening to them. I watched through the window as the Krivtal fleet, an armada that had steamrolled through Meridian 9's defenses without meaningful resistance, began to come apart. Not through overwhelming force in the way I had always imagined battles were fought, but through something more precise, more deliberate. Humanity had not simply built bigger guns. We had built a way to make the enemy's advantages disappear entirely. "Hold defensive positions," Bates ordered from the bridge. "Let them try to recover. I want them to understand exactly what happened to them before this is finished." For nearly 10 minutes, the Krivtal fleet drifted in confusion, their commanders no doubt scrambling to understand why their ships would not respond, why their weapons would not fire, why the space around them seemed to be working against the very laws of physics they had relied upon their entire lives. I felt something strange watching it unfold, a mixture of awe and unease that I did not fully understand at the time. This was not the desperate defense of a struggling colony. This was a demonstration. When Bates finally gave the order to engage, it was almost anticlimactic. Human vessels moved through the disabled Krivtal formation with methodical precision, disabling what remained of their weapons and propulsion systems one by one. There was no chaos in our approach, no desperation, just quiet, overwhelming control. Within 2 hours, the Krivtal fleet that had once seemed unstoppable was left drifting, powerless, at the mercy of a species they had believed incapable of defending itself. I expected the operation to end there. I expected mercy, or at least restraint, the kind of measured response I had always associated with human values. Instead, I watched as a single transmission was sent to the Krivtal home system, carried by a specially designed probe that would arrive there within days. I later learned what that transmission contained. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was simply a recording of everything that had happened at Haldren's Reach, along with a single message spoken in flat, unemotional tones by a human representative I did not recognize. The message said that humanity had chosen restraint at Haldren's Reach. It said that restraint was a choice, not a limitation, and it said that any further action against human colonies would be met with a response the Krivtal would not survive to regret. I did not fully grasp the weight of that warning until 3 days later, when I learned what happened at a Krivtal shipyard system deep within their own territory. a system that had launched 2 more waves of warships toward human space, despite the warning delivered after Haldren's reach. I was not present for what happened there. Few humans were, beyond the crews of the vessels involved. But I heard the reports afterward, delivered in the same flat, careful tone that had become common among military officers in those days, as if speaking plainly about something enormous helped keep it manageable. The technology used against that shipyard system had never been shown publicly before, not even in the confrontation at Haldren's Reach. It targeted not ships, not soldiers, but the very stability of the star system's primary star, using principles that Council scientists would later struggle for months to even partially understand. The result was not an explosion in the way most species understood such things. It was a controlled destabilization, precise enough to render the system's shipyards and military infrastructure permanently unusable, while still allowing enough warning for evacuation of the system's remaining civilian population. It was, by every account I later read, an act of devastating restraint. Humanity had the capability to do far worse, and chose, deliberately, publicly, to do exactly enough to make its point, and not one measure more. But restraint delivered on that scale still shattered something fundamental in the galaxy's understanding of itself. Word spread quickly, distorted and exaggerated as it passed from species to species, until the story being told across 100 worlds bore only a rough resemblance to what had actually happened. Humanity had destroyed a star. Humanity had reshaped the fundamental laws that governed the galaxy's oldest and most powerful empires. Humanity, the species that had been laughed at in the council chamber only weeks earlier, had done something no other civilization had ever dared attempt. I remember standing on the observation deck of the Aurelia Bright as we made our return journey toward council space, staring out at the stars, thinking about Verelek's bored dismissal, about the laughter that had followed our request for help. I thought about the 300,000 people who had called Meridian 9 home, about how many of them we had ultimately been able to save, and how many we had not. Commander Bates found me there, quiet for once, no orders left to give. "You look troubled," he said. "Are we the villains of this story now?" I asked. "Is that what we've become?" He considered the question for a long moment before answering. "We are whatever the galaxy needs us to be in order to leave our people alone," he said. "We did not choose this path because we wanted power, Daniel. We chose it because we were told, very clearly, that no one else would protect us. So we made certain we would never need anyone else to." I did not have an answer for him. I only had the memory of that shimmer in space, that quiet, devastating demonstration of exactly how far humanity had come, while the rest of the galaxy assumed we were still exactly where they had left us. Somewhere far behind us, the Krivtal Empire was already sending frantic, panicked messages toward the council station, demanding intervention, demanding explanation, demanding that someone, anyone, tell them how a species they had dismissed as insignificant only weeks earlier had somehow become the most dangerous power in known space. The council, I would soon learn, had no answers to give them. They had not seen this coming either. The council chamber looked exactly the same as it had the day they dismissed our request to save Meridian 9. The same silver light falling from the high ceiling, the same rows of seats arranged in that vast circle meant to represent equality among species. But the mood inside that room had changed so completely that I barely recognized it as the same place. I had been recalled to the council station on short notice, along with Laura Bennett, to accompany a new human delegation that no longer resembled the quiet, careful group I had first represented weeks earlier. Standing at the center of that delegation was a woman I had never met before, introduced simply as Undersecretary Claire Dawson, carrying herself with a calm that seemed to fill the entire room before she even spoke. Verelek was there too, though he looked nothing like the confident presiding officer who had once dismissed our plea without a second thought. His silver skin seemed paler now, his stone-colored eyes darting frequently toward the human delegation as though he could not quite believe we had returned. "The council recognizes the human delegation," he said, and his voice, once so smooth and dismissive, now carried a careful, measured caution that had not been there before. Claire Dawson did not stand immediately. She let the silence stretch for a moment, long enough that I could feel the discomfort building across the chamber, delegations shifting in their seats, whispered conversations dying out one by one until the entire room had gone still. When she finally rose, her voice carried clearly across the chamber, without any need for amplification. "Several weeks ago," she began, "this council was asked to intervene on behalf of a human colony facing an unprovoked attack. The request was denied without meaningful debate. I would like the record to reflect that clearly before we proceed." Verelek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The council's decisions are made according to established protocol," he said. "Resource allocation requires." "I am not here to relitigate that decision," Claire said, cutting him off with a calm that somehow felt more forceful than any raised voice could have. "I am here to explain what happens next, so there is no confusion and no possibility of another miscalculation of this magnitude." A murmur spread through the chamber. I glanced at the various delegations, noting the shift in their expressions. The casual amusement I remembered from my first visit here was entirely gone, replaced by something closer to wariness, even fear. "Humanity did not build what we now possess out of a desire for conquest," Claire continued. "We built it because we learned, definitively, that this council would not protect us. We accepted that lesson, and we adapted accordingly, as we have always done throughout our history. What happened at Haldren's Reach, and what followed afterward in Krivtal territory, was not an act of aggression, it was a demonstration of restraint." "Restraint," one delegate repeated from across the chamber, disbelief evident in the translated tone of his voice. "You destabilized an entire star system. We disabled a shipyard that had launched 2 separate invasion fleets after receiving clear warning to stand down," Claire replied without hesitation. "We evacuated the system's civilian population before taking action. We ended the conflict in a matter of hours rather than allowing it to drag into a prolonged war that would have cost far more lives on both sides. I would ask this council to consider what an unrestrained response might have looked like, and to be grateful that humanity chose otherwise." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had experienced in that chamber before. "What is it you are proposing, then?" Verelek asked, and for the first time since I had known him, his voice carried something close to genuine uncertainty. "I am not proposing anything," Claire said. "I am informing this council of new realities. Humanity will no longer submit requests for the protection of our colonies and wait patiently while this body debates whether our people are worth the trouble. We will defend what belongs to us, fully and without apology, using whatever means we determine necessary. We would prefer this council's cooperation in maintaining peace across shared space, and we remain willing to offer that cooperation freely. But we no longer require permission to protect our own people, and any attempt to interfere with that protection will be treated the same way the Krivtal's aggression was treated." I watched the reactions ripple across that chamber, species after species recalculating everything they thought they understood about the balance of power in the galaxy. The Threxian delegation, who had chuckled softly during our original request, now sat rigid and silent. The insectoid cluster near the back had gone completely still, their usual restless movement entirely absent. A representative from a species I did not recognize, small and pale with enormous dark eyes, rose hesitantly from his seat. "The Krivtal Empire has formally requested council mediation," he said. "They claim humanity's response was disproportionate to the original conflict, and they are demanding compensation and formal sanctions against your species." I saw something flicker across Claire's face, not anger, but something closer to weary disappointment. "The Krivtal Empire attacked an undefended civilian colony without provocation," she said. "They ignored a clear, direct warning after their fleet was disabled and released unharmed at Haldren's Reach. They chose, twice, to escalate a conflict they could have ended at any point by simply withdrawing. If this council wishes to discuss disproportionate responses, I would suggest beginning with the decision that left 300,000 civilians without any protection whatsoever." No one in the chamber spoke. "We are not here today to demand sanctions or apologies," Claire continued after a moment. "We are here to be clear about the world this council now exists within. Humanity does not wish for further conflict. We have no ambitions of expansion beyond our own territory, no interest in dominating this council or dictating terms to species who have done us no harm. What we require, simply, is respect. The kind of respect that should have been extended to us from the beginning, before any of this became necessary." Verelek shifted in his seat, glancing briefly at the other senior delegates around him, as if searching for some collective response that might restore a sense of control to the proceedings. None came. "The council will need time to deliberate on the matter of the Kreeftal request," he finally said, his voice notably less commanding than it had been at the start of the session. "Take whatever time you need," Claire said, "but I would ask that this council also deliberate on a broader question while it does. What kind of galaxy do you wish to build going forward? One where species are measured by their willingness to intervene on behalf of the vulnerable, or one where power alone determines whose voice matters? Humanity has demonstrated, perhaps more forcefully than we would have preferred, exactly where we stand on that question. I would ask this council to consider where it stands as well." She sat down without waiting for a response, and the session dissolved into a chaotic murmur of overlapping conversations, delegates leaning toward one another, whispering urgently in a dozen different languages that the translation system struggled to keep pace with. I found Laura afterward in a quiet corridor away from the chamber, staring out at the same observation window where she had once told me to message my family and remember what normal felt like. "You knew this was coming," I said. "Back then, on that first day, you already knew." She turned to face me, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw something genuinely tired behind her composed exterior. "I suspected," she said. "I did not know the full scope of it. Very few of us did, but I knew our government would not simply accept what happened to Meridian 9 and move on. That has never been how we respond to threats, not throughout our entire history." "Do you think we did the right thing?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars, the same view that had once seemed so peaceful and unchanging to me. "I think," she said slowly, "that we did the only thing available to us, once this council made clear it would not stand with us. Whether that makes it right, I am not certain anyone will be able to answer honestly for a very long time." Behind us, through the chamber doors, I could still hear the rising tide of anxious debate, dozens of species scrambling to understand a galaxy that had shifted beneath them without warning. The council that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant now found itself desperately trying to determine what role it could still play in a universe where the species it had underestimated most had quietly become the one power no one dared to underestimate again. I thought about Verelek's board dismissal weeks earlier, the casual cruelty of a decision made without a second thought. I wondered if he understood yet what that single choice had ultimately cost the galaxy's old order. I suspected, watching his pale, uncertain face through the chamber doors, that he was only beginning to understand. The council had realized, far too late, exactly what kind of species they had been laughing at. 6 months after that session in the council chamber, I stood on the rebuilt landing platform of Meridian 9, watching new construction rise, where scorched foundations had once marked the edges of a devastated colony. The air smelled of fresh metal and turned soil, and somewhere in the distance, children's laughter carried across a field that had recently been cleared for a new school. I had requested this assignment myself, a quiet posting far from the noise of council politics, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. The galaxy I returned to after that first turbulent year looked very different from the one I had known before Meridian 9 fell. Word of the council session had spread quickly, distorted in some tellings, remarkably accurate in others, but the core truth remained unchanged no matter how the story was told. Humanity had been dismissed, had suffered a devastating loss because of that dismissal, and had responded with a level of restraint and precision that left even our harshest critics unable to argue we had acted without justification. The Krivtal Empire, once one of the more aggressive powers along the galaxy's outer territories, had entered into a lengthy and humbling series of negotiations that stripped away much of their military capacity for the following decade. I heard through channels that filtered slowly back to Earth that their internal government had fractured under the pressure of their defeat, factions blaming one another for the decision to escalate against a species they had so badly misjudged. I did not feel satisfaction hearing this news. Not exactly. Mostly I felt a quiet, tired relief that it was finally over. Other changes rippled outward more gradually, but no less significantly. Species who had once treated human delegations with thinly veiled condescension now approached us with a caution that occasionally tipped into outright deference, something Laura Bennett found almost as uncomfortable as the earlier dismissal had been infuriating. "I did not want this," she told me once, during a quiet dinner at the Human Embassy not long after the council session that changed everything. "I wanted respect, yes. I wanted them to take our concerns seriously. I did not want an entire galaxy suddenly afraid of us." "Is that what's happening?" I asked. "Are they afraid?" She considered the question carefully, turning her glass slowly on the table between us. "Some of them," she admitted. "Others have simply become more careful. There is a difference, though it can be difficult to see from the outside." I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed, as I traveled between assignments across human territory, watching the slow, careful reshaping of humanity's place among the stars. We had not become conquerors, exactly, though some species still whispered that word when they thought we could not hear them. We had not built an empire of our own, had not annexed territory or demanded tribute from weaker civilizations. What we had built instead was something harder to define, a reputation that traveled ahead of us into every new negotiation, every trade agreement, every diplomatic exchange. Species approached us differently now. They listened more carefully. They considered our concerns with a seriousness that had been entirely absent during that first, humiliating session in the council chamber. And in exchange, humanity extended a kind of measured generosity that surprised many of our former critics, offering technology sharing agreements, disaster relief, and support for smaller species facing threats similar to the one that had once nearly destroyed Meridian 9. I met Grace Miller again during a visit to Earth that spring, and I found her far more willing to talk about her work than she had been during those tense, secretive weeks before everything changed. She had been part of the team responsible for the gravity lattice technology that disabled the Krivtal fleet at Haldren's Reach, though she spoke about it now with a kind of thoughtful weariness rather than pride. "People assume we built weapons because we wanted power," she told me, sitting across from me in the same kitchen where I had once spoken to my mother about nothing important, pretending everything was fine. "That's not really what happened. We built defenses because we understood, finally and completely, that no one else was going to build them for us. The fact that those defenses turned out to be powerful enough to reshape how the entire galaxy sees us, that was never really the point." "Do you regret any of it?" I asked her. She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. "I regret that it was necessary," she finally said. "I don't regret that we were ready when it was." I found myself thinking about that distinction often in the years that followed, as I settled into my role helping oversee the reconstruction of colonies that had suffered during those turbulent early months of humanity's new standing among the stars. Meridian 9 had become something of a symbol, a place where the old order had failed us completely, and the new one had ultimately made us whole again, though not without lasting scars. Claire Dawson visited Meridian 9 once during the reconstruction, quietly and without the ceremony that usually accompanied her public appearances. I walked with her through the newly rebuilt residential districts, past homes that had been raised from nothing in the months since the council session that changed everything, and she seemed genuinely moved by what she saw, though she said very little about it at the time. "You did something extraordinary," I told her, as we stood near the edge of the colony's central square, watching workers put the finishing touches on a memorial dedicated to those who had not survived the initial attack. "I did what needed doing," she said. "I would rather it never had to be done at all." "Do you think the council learned anything from what happened?" I asked, Or will they simply find some new species to underestimate the next time someone asks them for help? Claire considered the question with the same careful patience I had come to associate with her, the quality that had made her such an effective voice for humanity during those tense negotiations. "The council is made up of individuals," she said. "Some of them learned a great deal from what happened here. Others learned only to be more careful about which species they choose to underestimate. I cannot control which lesson takes hold in any given mind. What I can control is what kind of example humanity continues to set going forward." I thought about Vurilek, who had resigned his position as presiding officer not long after that session, replaced by a delegate from a species with a longer history of caution and diplomacy. I wondered sometimes what had become of him, whether he had carried any real understanding away from that humiliating exchange, or whether he had simply retreated somewhere quiet to nurse a grudge that would never fully heal. It did not matter as much as I once thought it would. The galaxy had changed regardless of what any single individual understood or failed to understand about the reasons behind that change. Humanity had earned a place among the stars that no longer depended on anyone else's permission or approval, a place built not through conquest, but through the simple, undeniable demonstration that we would no longer accept being dismissed as insignificant. I stayed on Meridian 9 for the better part of 2 years, helping coordinate the final stages of reconstruction, watching a community slowly rebuild itself from the ashes of a tragedy that should never have been allowed to happen. I met a woman there named Megan Price, a structural engineer who had lost her brother in the initial attack and had returned afterward to help design the new residential districts with an almost fierce determination that reminded me constantly of everything humanity had endured to reach this point. "Do you ever think about how different things would be?" she asked me once, as we walked together through the finished streets of the colony's rebuilt commercial district, "if the council had simply said yes that first day?" "All the time," I admitted. "We might never have discovered exactly how far we were willing to go to protect ourselves. We might have remained exactly what they always assumed we were, a young species dependent on the goodwill of others for our own survival." "Is that such a terrible thing to imagine?" she asked. I considered the question seriously before answering, thinking about everything that had happened since that first humiliating session in the council chamber, the loss and the fear and the terrible weight of what humanity had ultimately been forced to become in order to survive. "I think," I said slowly, "that I would have preferred a galaxy where we never had to prove any of this, where kindness alone was enough to secure our safety, and strength was never required to earn respect. But that is not the galaxy we live in, and I have made my peace with what we had to become because of it." We stood together in silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the newly constructed skyline of a colony that had once been left to burn while distant powers debated whether its people were worth the cost of saving. I thought about Laura Bennett's quiet composure that first day, her insistence that anger accomplished nothing in that chamber, her strange certainty that time alone would eventually reveal exactly what humanity had prepared while the rest of the galaxy assumed we had simply accepted our own insignificance. I thought about Ethan Cole's careful explanation deep beneath that secure facility, his cold conviction that humanity would never again need to rely on anyone else's protection. I thought about Commander Bates standing beside me on the observation deck of the Aurelia Bright, quietly troubled by the scale of what we had unleashed, even as he defended the necessity of it. I thought about Claire Dawson's calm, unwavering voice in that council chamber, redefining humanity's place among the stars, without raising her voice even once. And I thought about the people of Meridian 9, rebuilding their lives brick by brick, home by home, refusing to let the tragedy that had once nearly erased them define everything they would become afterward. Years later, long after I had returned to Earth and settled into a quieter life, advising newer generations of diplomats preparing for their own work among the stars, I would occasionally meet young officials eager to understand exactly how humanity had transformed itself so completely in such a short span of time. I never had a simple answer for them, though I tried my best to offer one anyway. I told them about patience, about the terrible restraint required to withstand humiliation without losing sight of a larger purpose. I told them about preparation, about the quiet, unglamorous work of building strength long before anyone else believed it was necessary. I told them about the difference between power used for conquest and power used simply to ensure that vulnerability never again became an invitation for cruelty. Mostly, though, I told them about Meridian 9, about a colony full of ordinary people who had done nothing wrong except exist in a galaxy that briefly decided they were not worth protecting. I told them about the laughter in that council chamber, soft and cruel and utterly certain of itself, and I told them about the silence that followed it, a silence that the galaxy had mistaken for surrender until the day it finally understood otherwise. The stars above Meridian 9 still shine the same way they always have, distant and constant and indifferent to the struggles of the small, fragile civilizations that live beneath them. But I know now, in a way I did not fully understand during that first humiliating day in the council chamber, that indifference from the universe does not have to mean indifference from each other. We built something out of that lesson, painful as it was to learn. We built a place among the stars that no longer depends on anyone else's permission, earned not through cruelty or conquest, but through the simple, unbreakable determination to never again allow our own people to be dismissed as insignificant. The Council realized too late exactly what kind of species they had underestimated. I like to think, standing here now among the rebuilt streets of Meridian 9, watching a new generation of children play in fields that were once scorched beyond recognition, that we have finally become the kind of species worthy of the stars we fought so hard to earn a place among.